You know, I'm not the only one giving support. Everybody here gives support. If you're an American patriot fighting for the Constitution, I can see how you can't give support to this cause. You know what I'm saying? It's either slavery or freedom. There's really no in between. So, you know, if that's what it takes, and I'm one of the ones he's talking about, then so be it. You know, that's the way it is. Our founding fathers were the same way. Remember, sacred honor, oath, you know, lives they risked. And that's basically what we're doing here. Same exact thing, you know.
Hello everyone, this is Erin, and today is August the 3rd, 2017. I have a letter here dated July 31st, 2017 from Daniel Riley. It says, Danbury, Connecticut. American people, my mind is extremely agitated for the situation of my country. I humbly ask that you give me leave to take a small amount of your time so I can attempt to explain the root cause of our unhappiness. To win back our freedom and country, we must first remove the blindfold of ignorance. Though the people may be blinded by the mist of ignorance, something is still telling them that something is not right, and something is still urging them to correct an evil which they are sensible. Here I offer knowledge so that the rivers of truth and reason can begin to clear itself of the stirred up sediment of ignorance. Government is founded in moral and not in natural or physical causes. Now, the moral qualities of man being only good or evil, thus every form of government must be founded in one or the other principle, which ever prevails like every other human action of a moral nature. This moral analysis is capable of displaying the true character of every government, of each of its segments, and of all its measures, something which a mathematical or numerical analysis is utterly incapable of doing. For instance, a government, a segment of it, or a measure founded in an evil moral principle such as fraud, ambition, greed, or superstition must produce correspondent effects and defeat the end of government. But resting upon a good moral principle such as honesty, integrity, self-government, justice, or knowledge, its effects will also be good and comfortable to the duty and office of government. Whereas the numerical analysis cannot with any certainty enable us to foresee the character of the government, because it has no references to moral causes or effects, good or evil. A government guided by the good moral qualities of man will produce national happiness. So any similar case under a mathematical analysis may serve to complicate the science of politics, because the public happiness ensuing from it, instead of being attributed to the good class of moral qualities, is too often attributed to the numerical classifications such as gross domestic product, unemployment, housing starts, etc. By exploding this analysis and substituting that of a government bottomed upon good or evil moral principles, allows one to better judge if a government is fulfilling its purpose. The great and direct end of government is individual liberty. Governments are instituted for the common good, for the protection, safety, prosperity, and happiness of the people, and not for the profit, honor, or private interest of any one man, family, or class of men, etc. Good government enables men to earn and keep their property, and when the public can sustain its interest, a greater quality of human happiness will be produced. Our much praised U.S. Constitution, instead of being that unpregnable wall preventing an aristocracy from ruling, turned out to be a mere cobweb. In 1836, President Andrew Jackson saw to it that the charter for the central bank was not renewed. Jackson reasoned that the bank was corrupting the government and becoming more powerful than the government. In 1913, the banking interest succeeded in rechartering its central bank, aka Federal Reserve. By a law or charter, a monopoly was given to a small group of men to print the paper currency of the country. It granted the power of substituting artificial currency, paper credit, for one naturally universal gold and silver, aka specie. Money or currency is not capital, but a representative of capital. It is by real capital that specie is equalized among commercial countries. As a representative, it is subordinate and responsible to its underlying power or principle, that is capital. Bank paper cannot possess intrinsic value, and its value is representative. Therefore, it cannot increase capital, and a surplus of paper credit beyond a necessary currency can only exist by feeding on capital, the principle of currency. If bank paper was new capital, so far from expelling the old representatives of capital, it would require more representation and attract species. Or, if like specie, it was a responsible representative of capital, it would be subordinate to its principle. On the contrary, paper credit is made by law, an irresponsible representative of capital, and a currency converted from the servant into the master of capital or property. It necessarily becomes a tyrant to secure its power. I said that paper currency can be a benevolent servant. For instance, a practice in colonial Pennsylvania furnishes a good example. The province of Pennsylvania became a banker. It printed and loaned a paper currency at a moderate interest. The interest was paid to Pennsylvania as a tax, which was applied to public use. This banking stripped of its mysterious science. Simply an indirect mode of taxation successfully used to raise national revenue. The assertion that it was not a tax because individuals voluntarily borrowed the money would be an assertion in every way untenable. Just like an assertion that an imposed upon an ordinary fishing license was not a tax because such a license was voluntarily taken and confined to several persons would be false too. In both cases, the payment derived from the privilege transfers the tax from the individual to the public. The difference between colonial Pennsylvania and the present mode of central banking is that the tax was paid by individuals to the public, and now it is paid by the public to individuals. Since the U.S. government sold the people because it's all they have to sell to the banking corporations, they have the power of making money and loaning it at interest. Back then, the interest was paid to assist industry and defray public expenses, and now it's paid to enrich idleness and supply the means of luxury to a separate and distinct interest from the public interest. Back then, the public required a knowledge of the amount paid from their own representatives, and today it pays an amount unknown to a private corporation in which it has no representation. We're back to taxation without representation. The paper currency dealt out by Pennsylvania was the public's interest and not for the interest of a private banking corporation. The paper circulated through the colony like coin, liable to no artificial fluctuations, and it generated fair, useful, and honest competition. When a different interest than the public's regulates the paper, it is made to inflate and deflate with a view to private or personal profit. Pennsylvania did not monopolize paper or expel specie. When the government charters a bank to have a monopoly on printing the nation's currency, it always terminates with all gold and silver specie coin being expelled from circulation, thereby making paper indispensably necessary. Having gained control of the government, the banking interest had it made illegal to make a contract payable in specie only. Federal Reserve notes had to be accepted as payment. See the 1930s House Joint Resolution 192. Today, FRNs, Federal Reserve notes, are forced on the people by the U.S. government's legal tender law. See 31 U.S.C. S. 5103. Here is what that renowned patriot who puts his life on the line during the Revolution as a captain of cavalry and the father of General Robert E. Lee, Light Horse Harry Lee, had to say about tender laws during Virginia's Constitution ratifying convention on Monday, June 9th, 1788. Permit me to ask, is there an evil that can visit mankind so injurious or oppressive in its consequence and operation as a tender law. The principle, evil as it is not so safe and pernicious as the application. It breaks down the moral character of the nation. It defrauds and reduces the people to misery by depreciating the value of money. This reverses the natural course of things. It robs the industrious of the fruits of their labor and often enables the idle and rapacious to live in ease and comfort at the expense of the better part of the community. Continuing the thread of how the paper monopoly works. The private banks that make up the Federal Reserve say, "Society, if you will permit us to tax you at, let's say, $8 billion per year, computing bank dividends at 10% on the $10 billion they created, you may tax yourselves at $2 billion. As bank stockholders, bank owners, retain their stock, they do not pay to the nation a compensation for the privilege to tax the people by means of this ownership. The $2 billion is ingeniously used to dumbfound the masses, so as to conceal the fact from them that they pay $8 billion to private individuals for the privilege of taking $2 billion from themselves and conferring it on the government. Giving a private corporation the right to tax the people in a great sum for the sake of the people exercising their right of taxing itself in a small sum is tantamount to bribes being given to the government for permission to plunder the people. Having expelled gold and silver as currency, creating the necessity of paper, the enemy's monopoly on currency inevitably allows it to manage it as to enrich itself by means of that necessity. It can supply the needed currency upon the terms and in the quantities it pleases, and its controlled fluctuations in currency produced and managed by this chartered monopoly can affect price and value, whereby it clearly follows that through his income, his money, his savings, and his property, an individual is reached by the tax of this currency, although he never borrowed or even has to use it. Such victims do not exercise the least formality of choice. The intrigue of paper money enables a small minority or aristocracy to take from the nation as much power and wealth as its corrupted conscience will allow it. Through public loaning to exchange private real property, it directly sells it by taxing it, making the landowner buy his own land. The bank creates the currency to loan out of thin air, to which the buyer mortgager must pay a tax/interest to the paper aristocracy/mortgagee. This makes the buyer pay sometimes 2 or 3 times the original price of the property. The buyer is artfully left with the appearance of property while he is only a receiver of profits for the benefit of the paper monopoly. And thus the paper system can sell all the lands of a country as if by perpetual auction. Had banking been called by its real name, it would be a paper feudal system. Even the precious metals have furnished to the contrivers of pillage and oppression a medium of extracting indirectly from nations a far greater proportion of their labor than they could ever be made to pay directly by any government. But the impossibility of multiplying these metals at pleasure inflicted a considerable check upon this fraudulent perversion of so useful a representative of property and labor. An artificial currency is subject to no such check and possesses an unlimited power of enslaving people to labor for a few. The country's currency is employed not for the useful purpose of just exchanging property, but for the fraudulent one of transferring property. That is, obtaining property without payment. Currency is converted into a thief and a traitor and creates, like an abuse of many other good things, misery instead of happiness. In fact, all paper systems become indirect laws of confiscation secretly and circuitously is their designed effect. Is one mode of confiscation criticized in condemnation because it is an open robber which quickly ends the pain of its victim, and the other patiently suffered because it lies hidden under deceit and complexity and inflicts slow and lasting anguish? Can violations of private property be rendered or just unjust by their mode of operation? No form of civil government can be more fraudulent, expensive, and complicated than one which distributes wealth and consequently power by an act of government. This small group of men who wish to gratify their own greed and ambition could not have effected their paper system without accomplices, and they gained them by corrupting the legal legislature, our supposed sentinels. Together their interest became one, but separate and distinct from the public's interest. This banking interest stealthily puts candidates up for election who, unbeknownst to the public, are aligned with this separate interest, thus creating a private interest dominate over the national interest. A legislature in a country where this system of paper prevails will be governed by that interest and legislate in its favor. It is impossible to do this without legislating to the injury of the public interest. They will cautiously borrow for the country so the bank can lend more. They are offering leaders great profits that they may share in them. They will prevent the banking interest from being exposed to an audit because to do so would expose the fact the nation is being fleeced by indirect taxation on the creation of currency. As growing anguish and poverty excite national discontent, they will proceed to fix their yoke more securely by gradually making it heavier. And they are maintaining their corruption by establishing irresistible militant police forces that are equivalent to a standing army, not to defend the national interest, but to defend their system of plundering the country. Elections have been made the instrument of legislative patronage, making the people appear to be the author of their own destruction, while in reality the ruin proceeds from the operation of the paper system, corrupting talents, enriching a small minority, and impoverishing the masses of the country. Yet the people are kept patient by election itself from an erroneous opinion that the government is administered according to the general will of the people. Patronage and paper are an invisible form of tyranny, unlike other forms of tyranny which are seen in the person of a king, dictator, or high priest. A visible enemy may be subdued, but an invisible enemy cannot be assailed. It's like fencing with a shadow. The only two modes existent of enslaving nations are those of armies and a system of paper. The Constitution erected several barriers against the army mode and utterly disregarded the paper mode. The possibility of that sort of tyranny arising from an alliance between an elective legislator and an interest different from the national interest was contemplated by the Constitution, and the whole fund of foresight then existing brought to bear against it. For example, on Tuesday, June 10th, 1788, at Virginia's Constitution ratifying convention, Governor Edmund Randolph, later to become the first U.S. Attorney General, said, "If it," the Constitution, "be defective in some parts, yet we ought to give due credit to those parts which are acknowledged to be good. Does not the prohibition of paper money merit our approbation? I approve of it because it prohibits tender laws." And on Thursday, June 12th, 1788, William Grayson said, "There is no disposition now of having paper money. This engine of iniquity is universally reprobated. The Constitution took precautions to subject lawmakers to the national will and to prevent them from getting wealth from the nation by their own laws, and to expose them equally with other citizens to oppressive laws. But all these precautions went by the wayside for failing to explicitly express the prohibition of paper money and legal tender laws in all cases whatsoever, leaving among the 10,000 implied powers granted Congress to create the legal invention of a charter giving to a private corporation a monopoly of using paper as the currency of the country. The uniform deception resorted to by a paper system through its legislature unites with experience in testifying to its uniform corruption of the legislators. It claims that its object is to pay down the public's debt and maintain the full faith and credit of the nation. When its inception commences, it promises to get a nation out of debt, create jobs, and raise the standard of living. But its real intent is to plunge the nation into debt and misery. A government must either be the fraudulent instrument of the paper system, or the paper system a fraudulent instrument of the government, or it would not utter these falsehoods to deceive the people. While a paper system pretends to make a country rich and potent, it only makes a small minority of that country rich and potent at the expense of the majority, which it makes poor and impotent. The fact is, the system of paper is united in a conspiracy with the government, entrenched behind a curtain of public credit and out of reach, so they believe, of the national will, which it assails, wounds, and destroys with impunity for now. True national credit diminishes the nation's tax burden by bringing in revenue. In contrast, bank credit increases the nation's tax burden without bringing in revenue. The fact is, laws were used with the traitorous design of enslaving the people by the introduction and maintenance of a paper aristocracy. Crouched behind the good and honest words, public faith and national credit, to prevent the nation from destroying that which is destroying it. The unproductive but subsisting interests of this system and the productive and taxed interest of society are in fact natural enemies. Payments by the productive and taxed interests to their natural enemy subjects them to their natural enemy. Our enemy is strengthened while we are weakened, and consequently, as a nation, enslaved by debt. That old worn-out argument that taxation is not slavery is to which the system of paper and patronage flees for refuge. Taxation is not liberty, but the distinction is obvious. It lies plainly between taxes imposed for the benefit of the nation or the benefit of a minority. Taxation to enrich a minority or aristocracy is robbery, and to endow it gradually with power is treason. It is strange that it is so difficult to distinguish between honest and fraudulent taxes imposed by a minor interest on the public interest, and so easy to discern the real design of taxes imposed by one country upon another. During colonial times, all of America's trade had to pass through Great Britain. The colonies knew that a monopoly on their commerce by the English was a tribute or tax, and eventually revolted. Today, we Americans refuse to acknowledge that the monopoly on our circulating medium of currency by a private banking interest is also a tribute. The force of the type of reasoning being laid down here is sometimes evaded by charging it with assaulting the propriety of taxing for the support of civil government. This is an artifice to hide the immorality of taxing for the benefit of the aristocracy of paper under the guise of taxing for the common good. To infer that we patriots are unfriendly to honest, needful taxes from our endeavoring to bring to light the principles and effects of the aristocracy of paper is only a repetition of the old, stale, exploded trick which induces the priestly aristocracy to accuse a man of irreligion whenever he reasoned against superstition. No nation would ever knowingly tax itself to enrich a separate private interest. This power to take from a nation and give to itself is the precise definition of civilized tyranny. Expect a perpetual increase of taxes because it is an incessant effect of paper systems. I worry that I may have tried the patience of my reader, but I beg to leave to be indulged with a few more observations on this utmost topic. Wars in former times enriched and aggrandized by conquest, in modern times by loaning. Perpetual wars is another incessant effect of paper systems. Consider this. Two governments subject to a paper system may engage in war for the purpose of obtaining power and wealth, each from its own country. The cause of the quarrel, the battles, the sieges, and the peace might be all amicably arranged before the declaration of war, and a complete certain victory secured to both governments without the transfer of 1 acre of territory. The victors have both created more debt, and of course is accompanied by the destruction of more liberty. This system of paper exhibits such a complete mode of enslaving nations, infinitely more powerful than any up to this time invented. It can conquer a nation while that nation is in the career of victory. The aristocracy of paper is founded in the evil moral qualities of greed and ambition, and must inevitably produce evil effects, because a sister is truly a moral being, and a moral demon cannot be a saint. Our country has no chance for national happiness under this vicious system of paper, because an evil moral principle cannot produce good moral effects. That a system founded like this upon evil moral principles is incapable of improving the personal virtues of government officials. But a system founded in good moral principles is capable of dispensing good independently of the vices of its administrators. The division and responsibility of power and the independence of the branches of government of each other are the vital principles of self-government. Accumulation and permanence of power or wealth arouse and excite certain evil moral qualities which perpetually strive to govern by the principles of force and fraud, and far from being instruments calculated to maintain governments founded in good moral principles and self-government. They are instruments calculated for their destruction. It is therefore a means to an end, capable of dissolving the several branches of government into one interest, and infusing the most unprincipled greed and ambition into this center of interest. No one has the power or skill to change the nature of good and evil, or reverse the moral laws of God. The advocates of good moral principles such as truth, liberty, knowledge, limits on power, equal rights, freedom of religion, and justice cannot be atheists, and the advocates of evil moral principles such as fraud, force, ignorance, despotism, theft, slavery, and exclusive privilege cannot be believers. By their fruits ye shall know them. If this minority interest with a monopoly on the nation's currency ever confessed its real intentions, it would sound something to this effect: our purpose is to settle exorbitant wealth and power upon a small minority. It will be accomplished by national debt, corporations, the patronage of offices both civil and military. These will condense the divisions of power in the government into an armed, moneyed faction looking out for our interest, because we cannot live within the bounds of common interest and can only subsist on its destruction like a parasite does to its host. We will require the nation to sacrifice itself for our benefit. Our goal is to deprive the nation of its unity or self and destroy the idea of a common or public good. Our object is to govern and pilfer the people by getting the utmost the nation can pay. We know that we are a sickly moral being and are conscious of our guilt, and therefore fear the people's revenge. Our success depends on maintaining an army, whether police or military, paid for by the people but commanded by our minority interest for our own protection. It also depends on corrupting talents and courage by terrifying the people's lack of courage and self-confidence, and by inflicting severe penalties on anyone who challenges our will to set an example. Moreover, we gain control of the channels of mass media, propagandizing the nation with irrelevant news and distracting the majority with voluminous forms of worthless entertainment, which we also use to promote immoral behavior because we are morally evil. Oh, how thin is the veil by which the people are deceived by these unfeeling bloodsuckers. Our admired Constitution is but a happy curtain to conceal our shame. The nature and principles of our government have been changed because the Constitution has allowed the government to grant a privilege to a small minority's private corporation of emitting the nation's currency, paper, credit. With it came the concomitant powers of brandishing national coin, of governing commerce, of deciding the fate of mercantile individuals, and the ability to influence elections and to corrupt the legislature. It has left the government and constitution standing in form only, by converting the sentinels of the people into the instruments of greed and ambition, and demolished the intended effects of division by a corrupt unanimity. To distribute or transfer land, property, credit, or currency by law instead of by talents and hard work is fraudulent and oppressive. A division of wealth by industry and talents has never enslaved a nation. Genuine public credit is aggrandized not upon gold gathered by law into a bank, but upon property distributed by hard work. The national credit is greatest when national debt is least. It flows from national wealth and prosperity, not from the wealth of corporations enriched by exclusive privileges. Real wealth can only be created by hard work or industry, not by magic. Alchemy at least proposes to make gold out of something, while paper out of nothing. When the rightful acquisition of private property through hard work and the fraudulent transfer of wealth by paper currency can both be called legal, then it can only be said for such persuasions as Gabriel and Lucifer are both called angels. Heavy taxes are both an effect and a cause of tyranny, and cannot therefore be admitted in a substantial definition of liberty. To survive this heavy tax burden, Americans are forced to work longer and harder. In days of old, to encourage industry, the lash was applied to the slave. Now, taxation to the free men. And the government is used like a pack of wolves by the paper interest to hunt its prey, the taxpayer. Americans are no longer free. The only ones who in reality can call themselves free men are the paper aristocracy. Hostile principles cannot live in union and friendship. As good and evil are natural enemies, eternal warfare must exist in the moral world, and the combatant which desists from combat must be subdued. Good too often follows into this error, while evil never or seldom does. Are you good moral principles? Are you of good moral principles? If so, then you must join the fight. The question remains, shall the nation destroy the laws that give exclusive privilege to a minority to monopolize the nation's currency, or such laws allowed to destroy the nation? Nations by false doctrines have ever been restrained from defending their liberties. This system of paper and the government it has usurped are rested upon evil moral principles. The government is no longer fulfilling its legitimate purpose. Thus, the American people owe no allegiance to it. We can assemble in conventions and wholly recall our delegated powers and update and revise the Constitution to protect against the abuse of paper currency and better express our rights and punish the perpetrators. There are strong and cogent reasons operating on my mind that tell me the enemy cannot be subdued by mandate, but by force only. One deceit has failed to protect their injustice and fraud, only force remains to protect it. I am of the opinion, and my reasoning and conclusions are drawn from facts, that the time has come to destroy the Federal Reserve and its wicked system of paper and patronage. I trust that the friends of liberty, conscious of the justice of our cause, conscious of the integrity of our views, and remembering our venerable forefathers, will meet this burdensome call with firearms, Freudian slip, firmness and fortitude, which become men summoned to defend what they conceive to be the true interest of their country and will prove to the world that we can, with cheerful readiness and resignation, encounter every difficulty and danger in defense of liberty and our unalienable rights. The object of this writing, as well as all my open letters to the people, is to awaken the American people of the danger by giving them knowledge. It only takes one sentinel to awake a sleeping army. Heaven never helps the man who will not act. America, your head may be bloodied, but unbowed to these evil fraudsters. America, do not take counsel of your fears. Come out and leave your fear at home. For war is being waged against you as I write, and it's time for you to grow a pair and do something to further the cause. We have waited with patience for the day to come when an opportunity would offer to exert ourselves in the cause of freedom. The wait is over. I feel that I have trespassed long enough on my reader's dear time. I will simply end with my nom de plume. Take good care. P.S. Please post online, CC to the world.